So whatever you're going to write, make reference to this section. If you are a writer and focusing on environment, you make reference to this section. So that people they know and are clear. Not questions all is in Zimbabwe. Yes, no questions. Because you won't be on the table. So this is the principal document, and I go back to my slide. Right. And we have the Environmental Management Act. I'm sure you're aware of that. And who is that? You know it? Come on. Do you know the Environmental Management Act? Yes. Yeah, that's an act that we have. And I'm happy that at least in here we have someone from the Environment Department. The Environment Department is under our ministry. And the Environmental Management Act is the one that gave birth to environmental management budgets. This is the parts that are under the ministry. Now, the environmental management is an act. You know what it is. It's not a consistent act. It won't be like, I don't know how to say it, you know, as an act. You don't know that it's not point that is there's no fines involved. There are many statutory instruments under this act. The idea is for us to manage our environment. Yes. Right. And we have the National Development Strategy 1, which is our economic blueprint. From this year up to when? Up to 2025. It's a 5-year development program. That's our development agenda. Remember, we had the Transitional Stabilization Program from 2018 up to 2020, with the Zima set for TSP, and after TSP, we now have NGSY. That's the economic blueprint of the country. And there is a pillar that is focusing on climate resilience, environmental conservation, and related matters under this National Development Strategy 1. So if climate change issues are featuring in the National Economic Blueprint, the nation is serious. People want to be sure climate change is real. It's affecting us. We have to plan. And even if you check the actions that are proposed in the NGSY to build climate resilience, to reduce emissions, to make sure that our communities are safe. If you are safe, if I am safe, if both of us are safe, then we are happy. The important NGS1 and NG. When you read these articles, make reference to this NGS1 as well. Especially the section that deals with climate resilience. Then we also have our own national climate policy, which was launched in 2017. Which is very, very important, and it has aims and objectives. The idea is to build resilience. The idea is to reduce our emissions. The idea is to mainstream climate change in each and every economic sector. The idea is to have a low carbon and climate resilient Zimbabwe. When you say low carbon, I think we heard it from Ms. Mashungu that emissions are going up there. We are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. So low carbon, we are saying less emissions. Resilience, our ability to absorb disturbances. Adaptation. How to build our resilience. There's a project that is being implemented by Ministry of Agriculture together with our ministry. Building resilience of agro-based livelihoods. They want to build resilience of agro-based livelihoods. What are agro-based livelihoods? I want to make it as interactive as possible so that the science in Zimbabwe What are agro-based livelihoods? Anyone to attend? Anyone willing to attend? When you're going to write agro-based livelihoods, what was that? Come on, you guys. Agro-based livelihoods. Zimbabwe is an agro-based nation. So what was that? What are agro-based livelihoods? Yes, thank you.
We're talking about families who depend on agriculture.
More families who depend on agriculture. Thank you. Anyone else? There's someone who said something. It's one and something. What do you want to say? Sustainable agriculture. What's that? What's that? No, actually, we have to read this. Feel free. Agro-based livelihoods. What's that? Oh, yeah, maybe those are some of the practices.
Okay, I was saying sustainable agricultural practice.
Okay.
Which does not harm the environment, like my policies that are aim at like cultivating maybe more than 30 meters away from the river banks. Also avoid toxic chemicals. Cycles.
Okay.
From water beds.
You are working, and it's a livelihood, right?
Yeah.
Your farming is a livelihood, that is. You are earning money, you are earning a living out of it. And that's a livelihood. So agro-based, these are livelihoods that are agriculture-based. Simple. Yes. Agro-based. Zimbabwe is an agro-based nation, meaning we depend on agriculture. But we depend on rain-fed agriculture. That's what makes us vulnerable. That's why we are vulnerable. Very much vulnerable. National Climate Change Response Strategy. That's our key planning tool. Key planning document. Is the one with sector-specific actions to reduce emissions and build resilience in all sectors. If you take a look at it, it's there everywhere, online, response strategy, you download it. You see final actions. There are actions under health, there are actions under water, there are actions under settlements, there are actions trying to build resilience and reduce emissions. Remember our vision, a low carbon and climate resilient nation. It's there. That's the strategy that we have. Then we talk of nationally determined contributions. Mashum is going to talk more about these ones. I'm sure when Mashum was talking, he talked about two approaches to climate change management. He talked about mitigation, he talked about adaptation. And this is oh, this is it. Are you sure? As soon as mitigation, adaptation. Come on, you guys. I see classroom, but we're trying to make it interactive as possible, so that you understand. Mabuda 2 days, but no, we are now well equipped to write articles. It's not so much. What is mitigation? What is adaptation? You said yes, thank you. Mitigation.
All right, my understanding from Mr. Mashingo's presentation, mitigation, we are looking at ways to maybe reduce climate change, and then adaptation, we are looking at ways through which maybe we can adopt or maybe finding new ways of existing in the climate change environment.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant. Anyone else yet? Yeah.
Maybe mitigation.
Yeah, maybe, Mike.
Maybe mitigation will be also focusing on the source.
On
the source.
Sorry?
Source. On the
Oh,
source.
the source. Okay. Source of what?
Of the problem.
Okay. It's okay. It's offline. Yeah, that's a letting. We are letting it slide.
I mean, on the source we are saying the greenhouse gases.
Okay.
In terms of
Okay.
climate change.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. So maybe that way you can just add more. Yeah, maybe the lady and the gentleman, then you over whatever answer should talk later.
Okay, on mitigations, looking at activities that are done to reduce GHGs. And then on adaptations, we are focusing on people. Yeah, that's
Okay,
what I asked.
it's fine. That's great. That's good. And you're trying to you're getting there.
Okay.
I'm sure.
Yes. On adaptation, I understood that here we are not targeting the source of the GHG, but we are actually looking at the effects of the whole processes.
Okay. Don't worry. At the end of this workshop, you will be experts. Yes. Anyone else here? This is the chance to say something. Those who are not saying it.
Okay, my understanding from the previous presentation on issues to do with adaptation was that this is the ability to live with the eventualities of some outcomes of, say, for example, disasters that come with climate change.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's okay. Yeah. That's why I wanted to say something. Then we.
I think they covered. As mitigation, we look at the sources of greenhouse gases and the sinks. And the important thing is that it's our anthropogenic or our human interventions to either enhance our sinks, as in Zimbabwe and the like, or to reduce the greenhouse gases at the source. That means, for example, my solar panels, meaning that will be now demanding less of the grid electricity, which is carbon intensive. Low mitigation, and then the adaptation, and these are just like my adjustments, my natural or human systems in response to what? To climate change stimuli, to my effects of climate change. So my adjustments, adaptation.
Yes. You heard that? It's like mitigation. So now when you write climate change mitigation in your article, you don't know what it is. Because there are articles about it, but now we now know what it is. We're trying to reduce emissions, implementing our 6 mitigation. Adaptation, we are adjusting. And we're trying to build resilience. Small grains, we're trying to adapt. Because it's like a shade. And I think we are mitigating. And that's the meeting, we are mitigating. It's clear? Yeah, I was in charge before, so I tried to make sure to propaganda this. Right. Then nationally determined contributions. Nationally determined contributions. Actually, is it there? Yeah. So, are there any questions so far? Was in my section that about those key documents. In my Shuba mentioned key documents. And a mitigation. Are there any questions on my presentation, my first section? Makuipa guys. Anyway, now starting from the MDCs, LEDs, and national communications, those three documents, Ms. Martin is going to talk about it in about 10 minutes or so. So that at least we move to the next section. Ms. Mashungu, over to you.
Okay. I also do. Okay. I know about NDC and what? NDC LEDs and no, NDC LEDs and national communications. Those three documents in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Good. Oh. Under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So Zimbabwe is a member of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, this board is bringing in countries together to respond to climate change. The three issues that I talked about in terms of climate change, one is the issue of what? Greenhouse gases. In Article 2 of the UNFCCC, that's where we have the objective of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is to what? To stabilize the greenhouse gases to a level that will not interfere with the climate system. That's the most important thing in the convention. Now, the convention now deals with these issues. One, the issue of greenhouse gases. Two, the issues of adaptation. And three, the issue of what? Mitigation. Remember, I said there are only three things which are very important. If you know these things, you are an expert already. Is it? Right. So now, under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the countries are supposed to report on everything that they do in terms of implementing the convention. So the countries report on their national circumstances. Remember when I was defining climate change, I was saying that the emissions that you are emitting to the atmosphere are as a result of economic activities that happen in a country for us to develop. So the national communication details everything that the country does in terms of climate change. So it details our greenhouse gases, the GHGs. Then with this one, it also details what we are calling the national inventory, which is that's the stock of our emissions. And that's the one that shows that energy is so much emissions, agriculture so much, like PPU and others. And it also details the adaptation actions that we do in a country. It also details the mitigation actions that we do in a country. So therefore, for us now to be able to report on climate change in Zimbabwe, all of us must have read the national communication for the country. So Google it, or maybe Tapio, you can send it to everyone. So send everyone the national communication for the country. It details where Zimbabwe is, adaptation actions, mitigation actions, and also our national inventory in total. So each time we talk about emissions, the inventories and the figures and all this, we must reference as the main document, please, as the main document, let's reference the national communication. Is it? The other documents are going to talk about the message. But in terms of reference, let's reference the what? The national communication. Because these are the compliance documents which each and every country reports after each and every what? 4 years. Is it? So you want to know where we are in terms of climate change, where we are in terms of emissions so far, where we are in terms of mitigation. Officially, we have the national communication. So Zimbabwe has communicated the third national communication. Now we are working on the fourth national communication. Easy. Now, between these two communications, between the 4 years, in between, after every 2 years, we also report what we are calling the biennial update reports, which updates what would have happened before we go to the next 4 years, to the next 4th year, that is in between, on the second year. So it's sort of an addition to the national communication, but it updates because 4 years is a sort of a longer time. So that's what it is. But under the Paris Agreement now, remember, the national communication continues to be what? To be reported. Then there is an additional document under the Paris Agreement, which is called the Biennial Transparency Report, reported after 82 years. So the national communication continues to be what? To be reported. Good. Then we also have under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there are two protocols that came as a result of what? Of the UNFCCC, which is the Kyoto Protocol and the what? And the Paris Agreement. And what it was the Kyoto Protocol doing was to distinguish countries between developed and developing countries, where developed countries had more obligations to reduce emissions, and developing countries reducing emissions on a voluntary basis. But now, under the Paris Agreement, all countries now, they participate in the program of reducing emissions under a vehicle called now the what? The NDC. So the NDCs are a very important vehicle for the fulfillment of the Paris Agreement, which is a protocol under the convention. So you must understand the most important thing for climate change is the United Nations Convention on Climate Change. That is the convention. And under the convention, that's where we have the Paris Agreement, that's where also the what? The Kyoto Protocol. Remember, the protocols, they operationalize the what? The convention. So the NDCs for the country now are strategies, programs which each and every country communicates to the UNFCCC to say, we as Zimbabwe, we are going to do A, B, C, D to reduce emissions. Remember, some countries also like Zimbabwe, they are also posting adaptation actions there, but remember, these are not the main issues of the NDCs anyway. So even under the compliance system, they are not even reviewed as a result. No, because the general framing of the NDC was specifically on mitigation, but for developing countries, a lot of countries also posting a lot of adaptation communications within that process. It's a political process. Okay, so as a country, what did we do? We committed ourselves to reduce emissions by what? By 40% below the business as usual scenario, which is an intensive target. It's not an absolute figure. I think that one will ask shut over somewhere there. What we are saying that we are trying to say that as a country, our emissions, we have the total emissions, then we divide the population, then we replace it. That is the emissions per capita. So that's what we're doing. We are reducing our per capita emissions by 40% below the business as usual scenario. And what are the actions that we are taking as a result of that? We're talking about renewable energy, we're talking about composting, we're talking about climate smart agriculture, we're talking about IPPU, these other sectors that I've been talking about, which happen in the country for us to be able to reduce emissions. So we have the NDC. And the NDC, this one is a document that communicates to the UNFCCC, in which as a country we are going to be reviewed internationally by the UNFCCC and also the other countries. Now, different from the other document that we also produce, which is called the LEADS. What is the LEADS? Which is the Low Emission Development Strategy. Are they different from this one, the NDC and the LEADS? They are not different as such. They're almost the same because they are talking about a pathway towards reducing emission for the country. And then the Low Emission Development Strategy. This one is a 2050 document. This one is a 2030 document in terms of this idea. But then for the Low Emission Development Strategy, different from the NDC, is that this one we are doing it locally as a country, and it shows political commitment. No one is coming to us to say, you have not done this, that for your legs. But this is something that we are doing as a show as a country that we are committed to reduce emissions. And in other words, people might ask you, does Zimbabwe have a green economy strategy? Yes, this is the green economy strategy itself. That's just names anyway. Does Zimbabwe have a long-term strategy? Yes, this is the same. Does Zimbabwe have a low carbon development strategy? Yes, it's the same. So it's just a naming. So this is just a strategy for the country to be able to reduce emissions. And it has all of these issues that we've been talking about, be it policies. Remember, mitigation actions, they span around a lot of issues. One, it might be actions on the ground in terms of projects. It might be the standards. We are coming up with a standard to say that so much of such equipment with such efficiency, they don't get into the country. It's a standard, it's a mitigation action. It might be even a policy. When we implement a policy for such like a renewable energy policy, it's a country's mitigation action. It might be so our mitigation does not end with projects alone, or does not end with the standards or policies. But any action that we do, be it policy, action, and standard, that aims at what? Reducing emission is still a mitigation action. I don't know if I have said enough.
Maybe 2 minutes for questions. Are there any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mamashu, for the insightful information. I'd like to know how many countries are there in this Paris Agreement?
Negotiators, tell us. Tell us, negotiators.
195.
Good, thank you. I think in Mr. is more information on that one. Is our chief negotiator.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask in regards to the low emission development strategy, what is this country's target and by which year on the reduction aspect?
Yeah, like I said, the MDC target by 2030 is it? We said 40% is it? Then rates also by 2050. It's also 40% by this one, but the rates should understand it is more wider than this one. And remember, maybe the small slide is different, which I maybe want to emphasize that for the MDC, we select some actions to say that to the international community, we are promising to achieve this by so much time. And we are open to you to review us to see whether we've done it or we have not. So you find out that the selection of actions for the MDC is a very much of a consultative process and more of a political process, much of it, and it has to be sort of propagated by the project proponents themselves, because the results for the NDC are what they are needed. This is something that is very, very important. So we find that the actions that are there in the LEDs and those which are in the NDC, they are sort of, the ones in the NDC, they are fewer than the ones which are more in the what? In the LEDs. In the LEDs, we have sort of more than 38 mitigation actions. Then in the NDC, we have around 57 actions somewhere in terms of the actions that we put in terms of this one. This one for international compliance and also this one for local compliance. So basically that's what it is. And this, the LEDs is just like a green economy strategy for the country. This one compliance with the what? With the Paris Agreement or the Unity. Yes.
Right, thank you. And when you look at our performance with the NDC, I know the target is 2030, but when we look at it now, how far have you gone in terms of implementation of any of the plans that are in the NDS and in the LEDs?
Thank you so much. Like I said, the mitigation actions, one, they involve what? Projects, is it? They also involve what? Even standards, is it? They also involve even some of the policies, is it? Because that's a mitigation action. Remember, if you are putting a ban on incandescent bulbs, it's just a ban, somewhere there, it's a standard, whatever. Remember, it's more effective than a project maybe on the ground, because for this one, it's just making sure that such appliance we don't get it from our border anyway. So we just replace that one. No, so it's like, so what have we done so far? It's a very good question. So far, remember, more of our emissions were coming from more on the energy part of it. So what has the country done so far? Using our own resources as government, we have managed to train most of the big companies in terms of energy efficiency, and we're paying these huge monies for the companies to come and participate in that one. And we did it through our Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority, which is ZERA. We've also now come up with the energy efficiency policy, which was validated, I think, last week, and the other journalists were here, I'm sure we participated. We now have a renewable energy policy, which seeks now to promote more renewable energy, but also in terms of investments around it. Biofuels policy, doing that one. So we are moving that one. And currently also, we are finalizing the minimum energy performance standards for appliances. You know, so these are some of the issues that we are doing. So already, remember, even without getting any funds coming from outside, the company, the government itself is a lot in terms of political commitment. One other good example also coming from the government, especially from our finance ministry, all ministries were given a note to say that in your 2021 budget, please ensure that the budget are taking into consideration the issues of climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. So you can see already the direction which we are going through. So we are not just coming up with ABC. They now try to say, can you give us money? But work is already what is happening through our own systems. So basically that's what we are doing. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. I just want to know what we have done so far as a country. But do you think we have managed to reduce climate change vulnerability amongst our poor or rural communities, or those communities that are assumed to be hard hit by climate change? Thank you.
Very good. Yes. Like I said, climate change adaptation is, we said it's what? It's connected to what? Climate change adaptation is what? It's context specific. It's context specific. Context specific. Then, one thing that we cannot be able to do is to be able to sit down today and come up with a national adaptation plan tomorrow. That cannot happen because it has to be consultative. It was also to take into consideration the context part of it. So what are we doing as a government? Very important. We are coming up with a national adaptation plan. But what does that mean? Which means we have 66 districts in the country. So because of that now, under the program that we are having in terms of coming up with a national adaptation plan, we have to ensure that for all the districts, it has to be a census going to each and every district, bringing all the stakeholders together, then be able to craft those issues so that we are able to come up with a plan. So far, I think it's been designed, we've gone to more than 30 so far. 30, yes. So that's what we are doing, because we cannot say that we've consulted good and so therefore they are close to Zaka, so it's the same, that type of thing. That's how I'm thinking. Remember, for a government process, definitely has to ensure that everyone is what is consulted in that one. So within that national adaptation process, everyone is what being consulted, including DCP, agriculture, energy, infrastructure, and everyone within that one. So it's our encouragement that possibly let's participate in this process. If we don't know what is happening, possibly let's continue to engage. This one is a two-way communication. So it's a very good question. Thank you so much. And you are in the process of coming up with a national adaptation plan that takes into consideration those context specific issues.
Second question, you didn't answer it.
Mr. Oshun, I wanted to talk about, I wanted to ask, are we moving with the same speed in terms of development? Let's look at the use of coal.
Yes.
We are a developed nation. Well, we are a developing nation.
Yes.
We are talking about developed nations. Yes. We are talking about the ending the use of coal.
Yes.
Moving to solar or something. Are we able to migrate from, let's say, abandoning coal to solar at the same speed with the developed nations? If you look at it that way. Did you get me?
Yeah, I got you.
Yes. Because we are talking about one and the same thing. This climate change is affecting us all, yes. But in terms of development, they used coal to develop. They moved more than 100 years ahead of us. We are behind. But we are saying, let's leave coal now. Yet we are saying we have Wange, we have all these thermal power stations producing coal, about producing energy. We want that, we want energy. Do we have the capacity to jump from, let's say, we abandon coal today, we are using solar completely. We have enough electricity, we have everything. Can we do that? Do we have the capacity? Do we have the finances? What are we doing in terms of that? Is there anything that can be done to cushion us? Let's say developed nations versus the developing nations.
Yeah, a very long and big question. Then if I fail to answer that one, you ask that you answer that one. All right, so that's good. Yeah, there are basically two issues, three maybe. The technology that we are using here for the developing nation, where is it coming from? Okay, I think I've answered something around it. Very good. Okay, good. So what is also coming out very, very important there is the word. Can you repeat the same word again?
No, I was just saying that the technology that we are using is probably from our own inventions or from the West.
Yes, but you talked about the word innovation, isn't it? Innovation, very good. Yeah, but I think what is something that is very important is that are we able to transition from this way to the other one without obviously following the dirty path, that type of thing, isn't it? Yes. The thing is, if we've ever had the issue of what? Stranded assets, isn't it? Stranded assets, I don't know the spellings. No one will beat you for that one. The issue of stranded assets. That's very important. You find out that some big financial institutions, World Bank, whatever, many others, already they are already moving towards banning of this. And obviously, what does it mean to say in terms of markets, in terms of demand for this one, in terms of supply also for the same? It's something that is very important. So therefore, the issue of innovation becomes very important if you are to continuously be competitive in the global market. But if we are not able to do that, possibly we will remain with a stranded asset which will not then sort of generate value. So therefore, the issue of innovation is also very important, but also looking at one, the physical risks of climate change, but more importantly, the risks, especially which are going to come as a result of transitioning to a low carbon economy, which are called transition risks. So the transition risks are risks which definitely are going to face us as a result of transitioning to a new global economy on a low emission development. But then for the countries that are not able to have that other eye, they will definitely remain with some of these stranded assets and also stranded businesses and also stranded not markets as such, because the markets are always moving away from that way. In fact, the population of the world are also demanding low emission sort of products, locally, not internationally. So that's one other thing also. So possibly we might need to move more, especially in terms of innovation, to ensure that we create new products going on forward. But is it possible? Yes, it's possible to do that one, provided with innovation. But obviously, under the current programs on NDCs and the developing countries still have some leeway to increase their emissions, but then suddenly also reduce on the emissions. But those who are sort of more innovative, they are more likely going to have a better market and develop their economies better. Because what then are we going to do if the demand is moving on the other side? We are still holding on to a product which is not demanded by the market. It's a question that I can also pose to everyone of you. Very nice article which can come out as a result of that one. Take that question and write a nice article.
Yes. I think. Thank you very much, Mr. Mashunga. I think we can give a round of applause for me and Mr. Mashunga. Another round of applause. Right. Thank you very much. So, moving on with the program, we are going to have a lot of interactive sessions. But now, then we do my panel discussions as well. Yeah. After these presentations, we do my panel discussions so that at least you can take notes. So, let's see. No problem. Right. The next session is looking at climate change adaptation in Zimbabwe. And we're going to have two presenters. The first one is Mr. Tivan Mwati, who is the compliance officer, climate change scientist focusing on compliance issues. Then the second one is our deputy director, Mr. Koza Indizano, who is also who was a scientist before and now a deputy director. So the first one, Mr. Mwat is going to present on the first session, Understanding Adaptation and Mitigation. The definition of terms, we'll be talking about adaptation, we'll be talking about mitigation. What is it? The definition of terms, giving practical examples, as well as initiatives. What are we doing as a country? Doing those adaptation and mitigation. So over to you, Mr. Mwati. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mutasa. Good afternoon, colleagues. Maskati, Vijoninja. Mr. Mashunga has given us the definitions, isn't it? Do you remember them? Or I should reiterate them? I'm going to be asking quite a lot of questions in my presentation. My presentation only has about 4 slides. So then Mr. Mizano will come immediately after me with some practical examples of what is happening in Zimbabwe. That's to help us visualize. But otherwise, there's quite a lot that is happening within government and also outside government. Our CSOs and even the private sector is also doing quite a lot in terms of climate change adaptation. And this cannot be exhaustive. So to start the ball rolling in my presentation, I'll go back to the definition of mitigation. But this time it's different from what Mr. Mashungu gave you. If you look at the words that are on the board. This is just to also to illustrate that there's no single definition for anything when it comes to climate change. But it's about the concept behind it. You don't need to look at these definitions word for word. It's just about the concept behind it. So the mitigation part of it, the concept behind is that whatever reduces the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we call that a mitigation action. Okay. So the examples, for example, the use of new technologies. Let's say we are constructing new turbines at Wange, isn't it? New units at Wange 7 and 8. But 7 and 8 are using new technologies, not the same technology that was used for number 1 up to number 6. Number 1 up to number 6, it pollutes a lot. But 7 and 8 is going to be polluting, but it's going to be polluting less. Already that's a new technology, isn't it? And for us, we also call that it contributes to climate change mitigation. If you plant a tree or conserve a forest, that is climate change mitigation. Why do I say so? Can someone give me a quick answer? If you plant a tree or conserve a forest, you are practicing climate change mitigation. Quick answer, quick answer. Can I have a quick answer from the media personnel? Mr. Guamu, you are in here. I targeted you because they are on your WhatsApp.
Let me hear the question in full detail.
You are not paying attention, that's why I targeted you.
Okay, the lady over there, okay, I will tackle it. I'm waiting.
Yeah, you haven't heard the question, so I'm passing you. The lady over there.
Yeah, reducing the emission of greenhouse gases by creating a carbon base.
Yes, calculating a carbon sink, isn't it? Yeah, so the trees are absorbing that carbon from the atmosphere. So we call that a mitigation action. So it doesn't have to be complex. When we talk about mitigation, people think of these complex new technologies and things like that. Geoengineering and something as simple as planting a tree is climate change mitigation. In the last statement there, it can be as complex as planning a new city. For those with resources, they can plan new cities that they call smart cities or redesign present cities to become smart cities. I think when we have hearing about the new city being planned in Mountain, I think we also hear that it's going to be a smart city, or at least that's the intention anyway, to make it a smart city. What does that mean when we say a smart city? We mean Accra is not smart.
Actually, they're trying to say that most of their.
Can you speak up? I can deal with the right.
I think they're trying to say most of their infrastructure they are going to be using probably renewable energy sources without use of any of these emission producing machines.
Yes, we are going to be using new renewable energy and issues like that. That is the more complex part of it. But it is as simply as designing our city with cycle tracks and also ensuring that the cycle tracks are safe, such that when someone wants to go to the shops nearby, they can just get on the bike and enjoy riding the bike to the nearest, because there's a dedicated track for that to happen, and not drive their car. By not driving their car, they are not polluting. So it's a simple solution, which I think is Harare and the Zimbabwean cities. We used to have all these cycle tracks in many parts, including the identity centers. But somewhere along the way, we got lost. And then the planning went somewhere, and we no longer have them. But just moving towards that, is something that contributes to climate change mitigation. So I want you to think of it in the broadest sense possible. Don't limit yourselves. The amount of examples I can provide, they are endless. And I'm sure you're also thinking of other examples. We are also talking of consumer behavior changing. Think of you as an individual. Some kind of behavior that you do that actually contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. Quite a lot. I'd like to ask those who drink beer, what can you do to reduce emissions in the course of engaging in your favorite activity? Using recyclable bottles, isn't it? Yeah, rather than getting the damage, we throw away and then we cannot recycle it. So we can use recyclable bottles. We used to do it, but now we have all moved to these small tiny bottles which cannot be recycled. Okay, so those are some of the things that can actually happen. So this consumer behavior, if you look at it, in some countries is already changing. And as a country, we will also be required to ensure that the products that we provide, they also go along with this consumer taste. For example, we look at Victoria Falls. It brings in a lot of money into the country through tourism, isn't it? And when you look at Victoria Falls, is it a green destination? There's this drive to make it a green destination. What do we mean by making it a green destination? We mean that we want to make, to ensure that we mitigate as much carbon dioxide which is related by someone visiting Victoria Falls to limit that carbon dioxide emission to as little as possible. If they are there in Victoria Falls, they are not, if they are bathing, they should use water from a solar geyser, if they want warm water, that is. Okay, if they are around Victoria Falls, if they want to move from A to B, if they can use an electric taxi, an electric powered taxi rather than a diesel or petrol powered taxi, that alone reduces the amount of emissions that particular tourist is actually contributing to the global atmosphere. That is mitigation. But we are not talking about it in the context of what? Of the tourism sector. So we can think of all the different sectors. There can be some mitigation actions that can actually happen in those sectors. Allow me to move on a bit. How do we know that we are doing enough to mitigate? It's a question that always comes. We are not doing enough, not only in Zimbabwe, but the world over. Okay? Why? Because our current economic systems, the world over, they are based on the use of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are very cheap. were very cheap in courts. Was in Zimbabwe, someone will tell you that petrol and diesel are not that cheap, is it? But yes, compared to other sources of energy, and also the technology in terms of the use of that energy, it's very cheap. So we find is that most economies, they find it advantageous to use the fossil fuels in order to make sure that the products that they produce, they are competitive internationally and they can export and make money. So it then becomes a very difficult proposition to transition from these fossil fuels to renewable energies, although the renewable energy costs have been coming down over time. So how do you know that we are doing enough to mitigate globally? There's something called the United Nations Environment Programme Emissions Gap Report. The Environment Programme assists us in carrying out the science and looks at all the contributions that countries are proposing in terms of limiting greenhouse gas emissions. They aggregate it globally and then look at the gap of what we need to do in order to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement of limiting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere and the rise in global temperature to just about 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial levels. So as it stands, the latest emission report from 2020 is pointing that as we are going forward, by the mid-century and to the end of the century, our temperatures are going to rise in excess of 3 degrees Celsius if we are going at the current rate. And if we take all the commitments that has been done by all countries in their nationally determined contributions, the Earth is going to warm by 3 degrees Celsius. If you want to put it in layman's terms, it means that the problems related to climate change that we are seeing today, they are going to be times 3 when we go forward. So we are going to have this tropical cyclone Idai with this much more power than tropical cyclone Idai, more ferocity, maybe times 2, times 3 what we saw with cyclone Idai. That's where we are heading as the world. So in terms of mitigation, let's look at it from a global perspective, because if whatever mitigation action you do, it assists in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Who's the one of this laptop? So it's running out of power. And then it's also not, yeah. So we have understood mitigation. And we have understood mitigation, anything to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And there are so many things that can be done. And then what is climate change adaptation? In terms of adaptation, we are looking at those actions we do to adjust to a changing climate. So even if we stop polluting today, like today, let's say today no one uses their vehicle to go home from here, no one, everyone uses, we walk home, no one uses Zuko or anything, not even the train. We walk home so that we don't pollute, we switch off the lights, we switch off one day and all the power stations in this world. Everyone just walks home and we go back to what we used to do in, I don't know, in the 1700 or something. Even if we stop polluting today, the amount of carbon dioxide that is already in the atmosphere is so much that we are going to witness, continue to witness climate change until the end of this century. Okay, we have polluted so much, and the gases that are already there, they are continuing to cause, or they will continue to cause climate change impacts until the end of this century. That is assuming that we stop everything. But obviously, we are not going to stop everything today. So it means that this challenge is going to be with us for a very long time. And this is why we need to adapt. We need to change. In our lifetimes, we are never going to see a normal climate again, what we call a normal climate. So in other words, this is the new norm. The unpredictability, and the extreme weather events. So we need to adapt and learn to live with this new change, these changes in the climate system. So it involves adjusting policies and actions. That's where it starts. So I think a whole lot of policies have been talked about by Mr. Mutasa over there. And most of the other policies in this country, they're still undergoing the review so that we include climate change within those policies. And then adaptation is two things. It can be reactive or it can be anticipatory. Reactive, it means that we wait for something to happen, a drought to happen, or a cyclone to happen. Then after that, we say, I think the water systems for Chimani, they were not okay, and the sewer systems were not okay, because all of them were washed away by cyclone, that isn't it? Then when we are building back, we build back better, isn't it? We then reinforce them and make sure that when we have another storm like that, that doesn't happen. That is reactive. Then what we want at the moment is anticipatory adaptation. That we anticipate. When we anticipate, then we already, because the science allows us to go into the future and look into the future. We can predict our climate up to 2040, 2060, and up to 2080. And what we are seeing at the moment is that it's going to be bad. So we need to anticipate what is going to happen, and when we anticipate, we can then start at this particular time to actually plan for the future. Okay? Now, I have a few questions. I've talked about what is adaptation and what is mitigation. I have a few questions which I need you colleagues to answer. You see, when we conserve the forest, for example, when we say we have Wange or Matumba Utsi forest in Oak, no one should touch it, no one should cut down trees in that forest. When you conserve it, is it a climate change mitigation action or is it a climate change adaptation action? Yes, Mr. Mwamombe, want to retrieve yourself?
Yeah, most probably it's mitigation because our target area is trees. We are looking at carbon sequestration. Thanks.
Is that correct? By conserving the forest, there are certain things we also benefit from it, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. When we conserve the forest, when we conserve our forest, and the wetlands that are within the forest, we tend to derive some products from it. The communities around can actually derive some products from it, which they can use in the case of a drought. You can use some products from the forest to actually survive. Is that not adaptation? So it's not as clear cut as we think, isn't it? Sometimes most of the actions we do, they're actually on both sides. Okay? Let's say we do mining. Right now we have mining of lithium at the Kita minerals, isn't it? And also lithium at Acadia in Gormons. So when we do mining of that lithium, it's contributing to climate change mitigation by making those lithium batteries, isn't it? Which are going to be used for electric vehicles, currently also being used for our solar systems, isn't it? Yeah. So that's climate change mitigation. But then you are also taking communities who have been practicing agriculture, working in these mines. When you have a drought, they are no longer affected as they used to be, because they are now working at a mine. The income is more or less the same whether there's a drought or not. So if they're not adapted to climate change. So once again, it's something that you would see as a mitigation, something contributing to mitigation. But at the same time, it's also contributing to adaptation. Okay? Solar power irrigation scheme. That one is obvious, isn't it? It's cross-cutting. Okay? The effects of drought are mitigated. At the same time, we are using clean energy. So we are contributing to climate change mitigation. Okay? Biodiesel manufacturing. Can someone give me something? Is that mitigation or adaptation? I'm sure you've heard about our biodiesel plant in Zimbabwe. Yeah. Yes, I'm hearing whispers. There's no right or wrong answer. Except if it's Mr. Guamu, because we have been with him for a long time, so I'm about it. Biodiesel manufacturing. When you do the biodiesel manufacturing? Yes, please.
I think it's mitigation because by manufacturing biodiesel, it's a reduction in, it's trying to reduce the use of fossil fuel.
Yeah. So it's mitigation, but it's not also adaptation. Where are we going to get the trophy from to feed into the biodiesel plant? From agriculture, isn't it? From communities around. And the trophy is a drought-resistant crop. Okay? So we are going to get this trophy and feed it into there. The biodiesel plant is going to be paying off these farmers who are going to be farming the trophy. So already it's again an adaptation measure. We are adapting to the continuous droughts that are happening in some of these dry regions, identifying crops which can be grown as feedstock into the biodiesel plant. So again, it's a cross-cutting measure, isn't it? But if you look at it from the face, you would think that it's only mitigation, but it goes beyond that. So as we write our stories, let's go beyond what we see on the surface. Climate change is a whole lot more than the obvious things. And beyond the activities and the issue of cross-cutting issues, there's also a lot of politics behind it. Okay? And there's also a lot of economics behind it. We should also investigate the politics and the economics behind it. When you look at, we should investigate why are certain countries advocating for certain technologies. If you really go behind it, you might find that those particular countries are actually very good at manufacturing that particular technology, so they want to export more. So it means that when they go for the climate change agenda, they tend to push for those things that they do well in terms of economic growth. And then also investigate what does it mean for Zimbabwe. Okay, try and look at the figures and bring out the stories with the relevant figures. If you are talking about the shutting down of Wangi, what are going to be the implications? How many people are in Wangi town? Okay, those who are directly impacted by losing their jobs, maybe 5,000 who work at the collieries. But then multiply by, go to Zimstad, find out the average household number in Wangi, multiply by 6 people, 5,006. And then you get maybe 30,000 people directly impacted because the breadwinners lost their job. Something like that, then the story becomes more impactful rather than just writing it as a mitigation and adaptation story. It needs to be linked with the real life situations. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Mr. Dizano will come with some things that are really happening on the ground in Zimbabwe, like examples. Thank you.
Maybe one or two questions, then we meet you if you want. Mr. Dizano, okay, please come. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mutaza. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's quite educative. I have a question in regards to the issue that has been earlier addressed by Mr. Mashung on the documents and the policy framework. You highlighted the mountain development and smart cities. What is the ministry's position in regards to the inclusion of people living with disabilities in as much as they would want to be informed as well as part and parcel of the developments that may suit their conditions?
Okay, thank you. Maybe 2 or 3 questions, then I give Mr. Martin to respond. In regards to this presentation.
Are you on top?
You said you're anticipating a 3 degrees Celsius temperature rise. Can you put a time frame to it?
Number 2. One more. Oil. Right. I'll start with the last one. The 3-degree temperature rise by the mid-century. Mid-century is around 2050. So when you are talking about the low emission development strategy, I think Mr. Mashungu touched on that. That it's a long-term low emission development strategy. So all countries have come up with this low emission development strategy. And the requirement is that the projections are supposed to be mid-century. Mid-century, it means you are planning long-term up to 2050. So it's around about 2050 as we go into 2060. That's when we expect the temperatures to rise by about 3 degrees Celsius. It's about 3 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial levels, before we started industrialization, which is around 1750, I think, somewhere there. So already the temperatures have increased by about 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius. So we are already almost halfway towards that. Then by 2030, 2035, somewhere there, we are expected to breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase, and then by 2050, 2060, the 3 degrees Celsius temperature increase, if you don't do something drastic in terms of reducing this emission. And you should understand one thing, it took us about 150, 200 years to reach this 1.1 degree temperature rise, but the rise is exponential. Like you remember exponential events before, and this rise is exponential, and it becomes steeper and steeper as time goes. So we are about at a point where it's going to become very steep if we do not do something drastic about reducing this emission. So we are expecting a shorter time scale to reach another average temperature increase of 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius. It's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years. What has taken us the 150, 160 years. So the situation is bad. And then to try and tackle your question to do with disabilities, as government, I wouldn't say our ministry position, because as government we are one, isn't it? Whether I need the Minister of Information, Minister of Environment, Minister of Social Welfare, which deals with disability issues, we are one. So when they say smart city, when they are designing it, it's supposed to be smart in all contexts, isn't it? It's not only the context related to the environment. Although when we are talking here, we are a bit biased toward the environment because that's where our climate change issues are domiciled. But otherwise, I think the smartness, when they say smart city, it also includes all those issues related to access to buildings and also access to information by people with disabilities. I think that's all I can say with regards to that. But I guess you can get more information from the ministry, which is the Ministry of Local Government, on very specific methods to do with the smart city. Right. Have you answered this?
Partially.
Yes, partially. Then the other half of the, he says partially answered. The other half of the, you get it from local government.
Of course.
I appreciate your response, but also as media, we also have also a challenge in terms of communication as well. Remember, I've got those who have got eyesight challenges, we have got the deaf, we've got the dumb. Those people, they also need to hear about these issues. And you as a ministry have got some draft copies, there are books that you're also working on, which should be suitable for such people. And that gap from the media aspect could not be closed as it ought to be. So as the ministry, that is what I was asking, what is the ministry's position in that regard?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. It's going to be answered by the next presentation by Mr. Zano. It's one of the initiatives under the National Adaptation Planning Project. So I think now moving on to the program, this is our last presentation before lunch. Climate change adaptation in Zimbabwe, looking at the initiatives, projects and programs, including the NAP mainstream program. So I'll hand over to Mr. Dizano, our Deputy Director. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, facilitator, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I think it's a great time to start talking to people when it's just minutes before lunch.
It's actually a good
And
time. It's a very good time.
It's a
We
good
are
time.
alive.
When people can't wait for you to finish. But I think it's something that also takes us closer to home in terms of what's happening in the country. So I'll take you through climate change adaptation projects in Zimbabwe. Some of the information will be like a repeat of what has been covered. But what's most important is to acknowledge that as a country we are quite vulnerable to climate change. And these are observations over time, where it has been observed that we have seen a temperature rise maybe from about 1990 to 2000s, and also a slight decline in terms of annual precipitation from the 1901 to about 2016 time frame. Further, with regards to droughts and floods, the observations that the southern and western districts are most prone to moderate to severe droughts. I think the south and western, you're all aware of it. So they're looking from part of Manicaland into Mashingo, into Great Bridge, into some of the Matabele North provinces. Then also there are some highlights of the major droughts that have been witnessed: 91, 92, 94, 95, 2002, 2003, 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. And from that listing, you see that as we get closer to modern day, the frequency is also becoming more, it's becoming also higher, the same as the intensity. Then also, we have had also floods, which are also highest in the same parts, western and southeastern sections of the country. We are looking at parts of Manicaland, down into Lekeshment, Mashingo, bit of White Bridge, but some also stretching as far as Jolocho and Matnon. And these are observations over time, with also similar events in terms of intra-seasonal dry spells, where we have seen it rains, then rains go away, then they come back after 3 weeks, and the farmer is rain fed. So it means they cannot get enough soil moisture to sustain their crop, right? And also, so these are some of the observations. But this is what we have observed over time. What does the future look like? So I think that's most important. So looking into the future, we're expecting maybe a mean annual temperature rise of that 1.0 to 1.5. But then this is also up to about 2040s, and this is with high confidence. It means the chances of getting this are real. And when we say an average temperature rise, we're not saying today is 20, what's the temperature today? Today is 18, huh? But we're not saying we're going to have a temperature rise from to 19.5. That's not what it means. This is an average. So which means it takes into account the whole 365 days of the year. So what it means is some days are going to be warmer by maybe 5 or 10 degrees. Then some are just going to be warmer maybe by a degree or so. So when you do that long-term average, it looks small, but if you're going to have a 5% increase in temperature, if you're a farmer in the irrigating, I tell you, you're going to experience a lot of evapotranspiration. That means you need to come in quickly with your irrigation. That means you're going to increase the rate if you're irrigating. That means you're going to draw down more from your water source, could be a dam or a bore, which means there's going to be increased competition for that resource. So you see now the impact that it has. So this also spills over to human health and other factors. Then also it's expected that there's going to be a decline of up to 10% in terms of regional
in terms of precipitation, while the intensity of events is going to increase. I think yesterday we got one of the first rains, but started with some hailstones. Did you see them? It was so dark and so that's the intensity we are talking about. So I'm not sure about the message how much they recorded yesterday, but could be maybe something significant, and we're going to have fewer storms of such, but high intensity. But also given our overall conservation of the catchments, it means much of that rain is just running off into drains, into the nearest river, into the bigger river, and off to the ocean. So it means we need to adapt a little bit. But in terms of adaptation, what does it mean? Oh, okay, I've forgotten about the droughts. We're expecting increased frequency and intensity, so they're becoming more regular. Then also intensity means we're going to have some more losses. The same goes for the floods. And also length of rain season is going to also shrink a bit. That means we need also to change even the type of crops that we are used to. And imagine if you have your grandma in the village, they are so used to one type of seed. So to convince them that this is no longer viable, let's move into this new one, which is shorter season. It's going to be a challenge. Adaptation, I think the previous 2-3 speakers have spoken about this. So I'll only draw on the pictures where now we said we are going to expect a decline in rainfall. But then also we also like our cattle, and also with growing affluence and exposure, it means we are going to demand more and more in terms of water, right? So let's not allow that high intensity rainfall to just run off. Let's build weirs and dams so that we capture the water before it disappears. But during the dry spell, we can come with our irrigation, we can water our livestock, we can actually have our nutritional guidance from this. Then also, where cropping has failed, we can move towards small grains, right? This is your aspect. Where we also you grow your sorghum, millets, and others. But then also, let's also have some sessions where people are actually informed of the changes that are happening and that are expected in the future. Because with that same understanding, people can now shift in terms of how they do things. And then I will skip this one. This is just to demonstrate what adaptation and resilience are, where the adaptation loosely some those crucial actions that we carry out. Like it's household, it's an individual, it's a household level, so that we actually reduce the effect of an expected extreme event. Then resilience is the might of the longer term, where you expect a system that has been shocked to actually bounce back and maintain the same basic function. So it's like, okay, there's been a flood, but then you have or some violent winds. Of course, you just get into your house, close the doors, close windows so that there's no wind getting in. But then when the flood or the harsh winds have settled, you just go out and continue living your life normally. So what this means is related to infrastructure. You have also adjusted the standards that you are building your infrastructure. If it's a house, maybe you're using the recommended cement and sand proportions in terms of compromise. You adjust your roof to ensure that it's also protected against maybe the direction of the most violent winds to where we are staying. So those are some of the measures that we expect. If you are doing your dam designs, even some culverts where water has to pass through, also take on board the expected amount of water as we experience climate change. So I'll move into some of the activities, some of the projects that have been implemented. One which was called Supporting Enhanced Climate Action for Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Development Pathway, abbreviated SECA project. The figures, as I start, some of these they are still the same, but some might have varied a bit. Because at the start, they have someone commit so much, they commit 100 bucks, midway they get another 25, they add the 25. So these figures may not be the most up to date, or maybe they experience a budget cut where they committed 100, then they give you 50. But then this is just indicate the partners and the amount that they committed at some point. So this was supported from UNGP and UNGP volunteer program. It also has some contributions from UNITA to come up with the National Climate Change Learning Strategy. then also the leads also from the Russia Trust Fund. But then this aim to scale up the climate change adaptation and mitigation actions in Lupane, Linima, Buyera, Boke South, and Tirezi. If you have been to any of these districts, you know like the conditions there are very tough. It's hot, they don't receive as much rains, and also, yeah, the communities are quite vulnerable to climate change. And also it promoted some low emissions development in these same districts, as well as climate change and gender sensitive disaster risk management, planning and implementation. You know, if you go to the district, they have their district development, their district civil protection committees, where they deal with all sorts of disasters. It could be rabies incidences, wildfires, droughts, floods. So we're strengthening that part of climate-related disasters, where you see how then if you get an advisory maybe from a services that it's going to be a drought here, what should you do with your livestock? What should you do with your grazing areas? For the times where there's potential, cut the trees, make hay so that you feed your livestock in the times of drought. If you don't have supplemental feeding, maybe you want to consider maybe actually disposing some of your livestock before you lose out. You're better off selling a beast for 250 early, even if you go and drink the other 20, you sell 230. Next season, you can still replace it. But if you wait until the drought really sets in, you're going to sell it maybe for 50 bucks. Even if for 50 bucks, if you go and use it for squares, the chimbas or something, you still get 100 bucks. Next season, you can still replace that beast. So those are some of the measures that you need also to have early action. Then also under the second project, there was support towards national climate policy, national renewable energy policy consultations. You see, the first two are already adopted policies. Climate policy 2017, renewable energy policy 2019, national forest policy consultation, this is being finalized. Flood mapping, Department of Civil Protection already now has national, sort of nationwide flood hazard mapping, where they can actually identify some areas that are quite vulnerable to flooding. Then also integration of climate change adaptation into disaster risk management. Yeah, both disasters and climate change, they're quite related. Then to address the information gap, there's also the National Climate Change Learning Strategy, I think some of you participated in. And this initiative is some of those that are identified in the National Climate Change Learning Strategy, where we need to engage practitioners or experts that can actually assist in conveying these messages to everyone using the various means that they're exposed to. Then this is the second project in pictures, where the bottom picture that's in Gulima, where a solar system was put up, supplying renewable energy to the school. The computer block is now working well. Then also some water power, solar powered water conveying system. Then this top part is in Chelsea, where it also look at maybe solar powered community gardens and irrigation schemes for climate resilient livelihoods. Then also in so in the picture that's permanent secretary in Turkey, I'm not sure it's not very clear. I think also behind him. So these are some of the investments. So this is a community that would rely normally on rain-fed agriculture or shallow wells, which will run out of water maybe by the time we get September. So with these interventions, now they can do annual all year round production. That's they're using irrigation for they're using rain-fed. Then the next project is Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund project, which is being led the implementation by Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development. We are also a key stakeholder, myself and Mr. Mwati. We sit in the steering and technical committees for this project, funded by the EU, Swedish Chambers, UK aid, as well as UNDP. So it's operating in 18 districts, being led by sort of 7 consortia. Each consortia would have maybe 3 to a number of civil society or NGOs that are actually doing the actual implementation in consultation with the government officials at that district or whatever. So as part of the project, it seeks to build the adaptive capacity of individuals, households, and communities through support to the diversification of livelihoods, accumulation of productive assets, and access to financial resources, investment in human capital, as well as increasing access to information. For the times why people fail to adapt is because they don't have access to the requisite information. So they do conduct training, some exchange visits, some pilots, market access where they can actually help. So these are the districts where they can actually link maybe those who are into penetrating for livestock, then they are linked to maybe Montana Castle, so they actually have a rate market as they do their cattle penetrating, for the time the market is a challenge. The same goes for vegetables, also trainings on disaster risk management, and also some forestry interventions. So these are some of the districts there. You see there's Binga, there's Minezi, there's Chirezi, there's Great Bridge, Nyanga. So these are the districts under the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Funds projects. And in pictures there, this is a tree nursery. So for trees, I think someone mentioned that some of these they are cross-cutting interventions. Maybe primarily the trees are meant to take in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But because we've maybe introduced fruit trees, it means where cropping has failed, the farmers still have harvest some mangoes, pawpaws, avocados, and so on the market. And also integrative in agriculture where they're keeping bees, harvest honey, process, package it, and sell it on the market. So this is sort of integration that we're also trying to pursue as we address climate change. And I think these are some gender aspect where you see some women are actually mixing some cattle feed. Then the next project, this one is just starting on integrated climate risk management for food security and livelihoods in Zimbabwe, focusing on Mashingo and Rushinga districts. This was approved, I think, last year, and now we are finalizing the setup of the project management unit. It is funded from the Green Climate Fund, which is the largest fund supporting climate change, mitigation, and adaptation across the world, with co-financing from Swiss International Development Corporation, Swiss Agents for Development and Cooperation. Government of Zimbabwe also coming in with in-kind contributions, where now we also provide the officials to work on the project. And WFP World Food Program being the delivery partner. It has three main components. One, risk transfer through the provision of weather index insurance. You know, at times a farmer would invest, but then like weather is so unpredictable. At times you get the money, you bought your inputs, but then a prolonged dry spell occurs, then you lose out. So you're going to try and pilot and try and upscale issues of weather index insurance, where maybe if you're affected by a drought, you get a payout. This has been piloted in other schemes with some success, and we are hoping that this will also work in the country. But for it to work, you will need also the insurance players to have a good appreciation of how it works. Then also they invest towards it. Then you also have some farmers who are knowledgeable of the process and the products, so that they sign up so that it also makes business sense to the insurer. So this is one pilot. Then support smallholder farmers access to markets and financial services for sustained investment in climate resilient practices. So in terms of these practices, we are looking at a number of asset creation, where maybe you have some projects. It could be maybe your irrigated agriculture, it could be maybe your climate smart agriculture, or as we have nationalized it. Then also you can also have other alternative livelihood activities, because these are not yet fully defined, because it has to be responding to the user needs or the beneficiary's needs. So it has to be a consultative process. Then also strengthening national capacity and systems to generate and interpret, deliver tailored climate and weather data. Once we get, so this is speaking to increased hydrometeorological monitoring in terms of weather, the temperatures, rainfall, even flows in river channels, so that we should be able now to package and alert the people who are potentially in danger, or the people who need that type of information, so that they plan with them from an informed perspective. Then the next project is building climate resilience of vulnerable agricultural livelihoods in southern Zimbabwe. This is one of the biggest climate projects funded from the Green Climate Fund in the country so far for Zimbabwe, where the government of Zimbabwe is committed to almost 20 million co-financing UNDP with the million. So the government of Zimbabwe is split into two, because one is cash, the other one is in-kind contributions. But then it has three outputs. One, increased access to water for agriculture through climate resilient irrigation systems. As you are aware, we have a number of irrigation systems. Some of them developed as way back as the 80s, where the use of water there is quite inefficient. So this recognizes that there's high risk of water shortages. So we need to modernize some of these systems so that they become more efficient. Bring in solar water pumping so that as a community, as opposed to paying for electricity from the ZETDC, if they have renewable sources of energy for pumping, it means their capital outlay or the input cost becomes lower, so it increases profitability. Then also scale up climate resilient production and diversification. That's for your agriculture, cropping, and life. Improved access to weather and climate and hydrological information. This is similar to the WFP project. So in terms of the project coverages, it targets 3 catchment areas. That's your Sale, Rumbe, and Musingwa, colored in blue. 21 irrigation schemes dotted across the 3 catchments. They also aim to establish 6,900 lead farmers and 230 farmer food schools. So like the lead farmers, they are the people that you normally follow, right? Yeah, so that their farmers who are doing more, you need to continuously build their capacity so that they can also disseminate some of the good practices with the communities that they are in. So there's also a number of institutions that are actually working with this innovation centers. That could be Omashingo, Makuholi, Escogin, in some stations. Then in terms of what it aims to do, these are some of the pictures. Okay, that's a solar field maybe for irrigation, water pumping. We've seen such a success in Bikita, where in addition to the energy that they're generating for the irrigation scheme, they are also supplying to a hospital nearby. And also, if this can be done at community level, this can actually be sold also to the national grid where you have produced in excess. So once you do that, you find also get some revenue. And this is irrigation, so it's a transition from large type of irrigation which is inefficient. Now we are moving towards drip systems, which actually increases from the 2 systems. I think you can actually increase your efficiency by more than 30%. So you see that's very important. Then moving to the national adaptation planning process, we said we are vulnerable as a country, and as we move, even on the global level, under the Paris Agreement, it sets a global goal on adaptation, which actually calls on each party to engage in adaptation planning processes and the implementation of. I think this one is also due for lunch. Okay, yeah. So for adaptation planning, so we need to integrate this, because over time it has been observed that there are a number of climate change initiatives, but they are not well coordinated. There's no proper guidance on who is at risk to what.
No, that doesn't.
Oh, it's not working. But I think you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
So this looks at we don't know what sectors are at risk, the extent, and what needs to be done. Oh, thank you, Ms. Sanders. You just hold the mic and
That's working.
Things are working again. So we are in this process so that we have a more of a synchronized and coordinated approach where we know what is vulnerable, what needs to be done. But then this has to be through a consultative process. So in terms of the aim of the national adaptation planning process, it has two main aims. One being on mainstreaming climate change across all sectors of the economy, which starts with the National Development Strategy or National Development Plan. Unfortunately, as we were starting this National Adaptation Planning process, that's when also consultations were underway towards the National Development Strategy 1. So if you look at NDS 1, it actually has a thematic area on environmental protection, climate resilience, and natural resources management, with a sector outcome on improved climate action. So that means we need to enhance adaptation and mitigation actions. Then it also goes on to spell out some of the strategies, which includes now climate change education, awareness and trainings, information dissemination, implementation of projects. So to date, and this has also been infused into other sector development policies, like the agriculture and GRM policies. Then it has concluded a countrywide risk and vulnerability study, which shall be published soon, and currently in the process of finalizing the adaptation options appraisal, because this was validated, I think, 2-3 weeks ago. Then also the next step will be to come up with the national adaptation plan by sometime in 2022, next year. And as part of this national adaptation plan, we have indication of risk and vulnerability per region. Then also some adaptation options that have been validated. Then it also comes with its adaptation financing strategy. Because it's one thing coming up with a plan, but convert it into action, you need to have some resources that you invest in it. So if you have a financing strategy, as well as a monitoring and evaluation framework or system, so that over time we assess how we are doing towards that. So that was component 1 of the national adaptation planning. Component 2 also has capacity building initiatives, because we need to have necessary capacities. And to do this, because planning now, along with devolution, we plan at national level, district, provincial, and district. But we realize that at national level, people understand climate change a little. There are some of the understanding is better. If you go down, it gets less and less and less. So we entered into partnership with universities, state universities in the country, and engaged provincial development committee coordinators. We sensitized them first on climate change, then invited them to nominate 5 members of each provincial development committee, who would then undergo the 3-month training and research program at a university within their province, right? So that partnership agreement, we also developed a manual to actually guide this training. So it left that permanent secretary for environment, Professor Mafumo of University of Zimbabwe. After signing the agreement, handing over the copies of the manuals, the University of Zimbabwe then trained Harare Province and Mashonaland East. So similarly, this was done for Great Zimbabwe University, which then trained Mashingo in Manicaland. Bindra University, which then trained my central province. Then this is the certification day for Midlands Province PTC members. So I think from the guy on the, I'm not sure which one. This one is the provincial irrigation engineer, followed by an officer in the provincial development coordinator's office, followed by a lecturer at Les College, followed by gentlemen with meteorological services department, then lastly an officer from environmental management agency. So these 5, for those who are coming from the provinces, in each provincial development committee, we have such 5 individuals. They might differ from the institutions, but these have been trained and capacitated. Now they should be able to champion climate change issues as they sit in that provincial development committee. So I think this will go along in terms of enhancing adaptation. Then beyond that, we're in the process of sensitizing and consulting district development committees. So far we are at about 30 districts out of 62, 64. So almost 60%. We're almost 50%. Where we have a day to discuss climate change issues as a starting point. So this was in Mashingo, I think it was Gerera. Zaka or Gerera, that's the director planning and tree. Afterwards, when they wanted to see which areas are vulnerable and what adaptation or mitigation measures can be implemented. So Forestry Commission gave us some trees, we're planting trees. Standing and watching, that's the Provincial Development Coordinator for Masvingo Province, watching the tree planting. A number of trees were planted. And we also came up with a training manual to actually go again and train district development officials over 3 days so that they fully appreciate climate change. Because whichever donor comes, they want to go to the DA or district development coordinator and say, we have some funds, we want to do ABC. So they should be able to tell the donor, like, okay, this is in line with our priorities for adaptation. If not, then they politely say, we thank you have come up with this idea, but we did our consultation, this is our plan, these are our priorities. How then do we find common ground so that we move forward? So this is the approach, and this is where we are, and we hope by 2022 we'll be having a national adaptation plan in place. I think this will be my last slide. These are our social media handles. Thank you very much, and I hand back to the facilitator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lizano. Don't worry, Mr. Mateo. Okay. It's time for questions. I'm talking, yes. Yeah. So I think let's clap hands for Mr. Lizano now. But colleagues, we are 4 minutes before lunch, and we have a discussion after lunch. And there's a session on a recap of morning session and detailed explanations of some of the concepts. So can we go for lunch? Then we have questions after lunch. And then keep your questions. Oh, it's fine. So if there are any burning questions, Mr. Mateo, you can say something. Yes.
I can say it's burning, but it's critical. Okay. Thank you very much. I understand that universities and colleges, tertiary institutions, to be more precise, are very critical knowledge generating institutions. But in my experiences as a journalist and as a citizen in this country, I have observed that when it comes to generating climate change information or science information, there are 3 universities. I think we have quite a number of universities and colleges in this country, around 30, 40 universities. But I really see other institutions involved in generating climate change information. I only see USAID, I only see Midlands, I only see NAST. Those 3 are most prevalent in systems and processes to generate information and also to contribute to information that help in our communities. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone important? No? Oh, okay.
But also, I just want to pose a question back to him because he represents about this. What has he done to highlight some of these issues? Because you pose it to the authorities, but then he has the power to push it forward. What have you done?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, thank you for the observation. I think, yeah, you're right. Universities, they have a role in tertiary institutions. And I think as a ministry, as a department, we have really done so well in terms of integrating their roles. Even if starting from a policy perspective, where the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education has Education 5.0, which tries to promote research that actually offers solutions to the current challenges that we have. And I think, unfortunately, on the picture, I think for some reason I just picked use that for neutrality, since we are in Harare. But in this, we worked with all universities. Okay. If you, Matt South was trained at Matt North at Lupane State University, which actually has a master's program in climate change and sustainability. So I think they are on board, and they have done some interesting research, which I think we are also trying to tap into. So even Bindra Invest was part of, so all state universities were involved. Then in terms of their contribution even to the climate change work, some of the work we do under the National Adaptation Planning is done by consultants, where I think we have even the universities we didn't mention, we have expert lecturers from Bindra State Bindra University of Science and Education, leading now the future climate scenario modeling and also coming up with interpretations. Universities, they were part of, I think we had two lecturers from there. So we are doing quite well. Then you look at tertiary, other colleges, polytechnics, on climate change, we haven't really found a good entry point. But so far on ozone layer protection, I think which is also very closely related to climate change. When they train most of these refrigeration and air conditioning technicians, that would then come and fix our air conditioners, our fridges, replacing the unwanted refrigerants, the gases that they use to cool, with now climate change and climate and ozone friendly technologies. So we actually developed together the curriculum, and we've even capacitated them, given them some training tools, some refrigerators, refrigerant identifiers, so that they enhance the training. So I think in a way we are collaborating so well. In terms of what then can be done is asked by Mr. Boni. I think that one I can leave it for discussion. Then you, as media personnel, you see how then also you try and encourage some of these universities that are still coming up. And also I think also by year of establishment, it takes also a bit of time before one university can actually start contributing actively. But I think it's a process that we are seeing that it's evolving and it's coming up well. There's increased output from all this. They have appreciated that climate change is indeed a challenge, which needs all of us as Zimbabweans hands on the deck to play our part. If you're in research, you do that. If you're a practitioner, you do that. If you're into communication, let's share the way. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. And I think let's have the questions after lunch.
Mm-hmm.
So lunch is served upstairs, first floor. On your way out, you get your meal tickets. Yes, 1 hour. And this is 13:30, so CBA 14:30.